Commander Zex Kalar stood on the bridge of his warship, watching the small human vessel approach through the darkness of space. His 4 compound eyes followed every movement of the strange craft as it slowly docked with his massive battlecruiser. The human ship looked tiny compared to his own vessel, like a child's toy next to a real weapon of war. Zex Kalar had fought in more battles than most beings could count. His thick, dark shell bore the marks of energy weapons and blade cuts from 17 different wars across the galaxy. He had commanded fleets that destroyed entire planets and led ground forces that conquered star systems. Other alien races respected him, feared him, and followed his orders without question. But today, he felt something he had not experienced in many years. He felt uncertain. The war against the Voidborn Collective had been going badly for 3 years. These strange creatures from the edge of the galaxy consumed everything in their path, turning whole worlds into lifeless rocks. They fought without fear, without mercy, and without any desire for peace. The Galactic Council had tried everything they could think of to stop them, but nothing worked. Then someone suggested asking the humans for help. Zex Kalar remembered the day that proposal came up in the War Council. Most of the commanders laughed. Humans had only learned to travel between stars 20 years ago. They were new to space, new to galactic politics, and seemed weak compared to the older races. They had no natural armor like the Thraxians, no enhanced strength like the Corvani, and no psychic abilities like the Xantharians. They were just soft pink creatures from a small blue world that most aliens had never heard of. But the Galactic Council was desperate. They had lost too many ships, too many worlds, and too many good soldiers. If the humans wanted to help, they would accept any assistance they could get. The airlock opened with a soft hiss and the human delegation stepped onto Zex Kalar's ship. The commander studied them carefully, trying to understand what he was seeing. They were even smaller than he had expected, barely reaching his chest in height. Their skin looked thin and fragile, like it would tear at the slightest touch. They had only 2 eyes, placed close together on the front of their heads, which seemed like a terrible design for spotting enemies. The leader of the human group stepped forward and saluted. His uniform was simple and practical, without the decorative elements that most alien military leaders preferred. His face was young and unmarked by battle scars, which surprised Zex Kalar. Most species only sent their most experienced warriors to important meetings like this. Commander Zex Kalar, I am Lieutenant Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Corps, the human said. His voice was steady and clear, showing no sign of fear or nervousness. Thank you for agreeing to work with us in this operation. Zex Kalar clicked his mandibles together, a sound that usually made other aliens step back in fear. The humans did not move. They stood calmly, waiting for his response. This impressed him slightly, though he tried not to show it. Lieutenant Morrison, Zex Kalar replied, his voice creating deep rumbles that vibrated through the ship's hull. I hope your people understand what they are volunteering for. The Voidborn do not take prisoners, they do not negotiate. They exist only to destroy and consume. This will not be like the small conflicts your species has experienced on your homeworld. Jake Morrison nodded seriously. We understand the risks, Commander. Our intelligence teams have studied all available data on the Voidborn. We know what we are facing. Do you? Zex Kalar asked. He gestured toward a large screen that showed images from recent battles. Look at these recordings. The Voidborn destroyed a Corvani battle fleet in less than 10 minutes. The Corvani are twice as strong as humans and have been fighting in space for over 1,000 years. What makes you think your people can do better? The other humans in the group exchanged quick glances, but Jake Morrison kept his eyes fixed on Zex Kalar. We cannot promise we will do better, Commander, but we can promise we will try. Sometimes that is enough. Zex Kalar studied the young human more carefully. There was something in his eyes that reminded the alien commander of his most experienced soldiers. It was not arrogance or foolish bravery. It was a quiet confidence that spoke of inner strength. Jake Morrison looked like he had already accepted that this mission might kill him, but he was willing to do it anyway. Very well, Zex Kalar said finally. You will serve as my liaison officer during this operation. Your job will be to coordinate between human and Thraxian forces. You will follow my orders without question, and you will keep your people in line. Can you do this? Yes, sir, Jake replied without hesitation. The meeting continued for another hour as they discussed the details of the upcoming mission. The target was Kepler 442b, a rocky planet on the edge of Voidborn territory. Intelligence reports suggested that the enemy was building some kind of large facility there, possibly a breeding center or weapons factory. A joint force of Thraxian and human ships would attack the planet and destroy whatever the Voidborn were constructing. As the humans prepared to return to their ship, Jake Morrison approached Zex Kalar privately. Commander, I have a request. Speak. I would like to volunteer my team for the initial reconnaissance mission. We need to get close to the enemy facility and gather detailed information before the main attack begins. This will be the most dangerous part of the operation. Zex Kalar stared at the human in disbelief. Lieutenant, do you understand what you are asking? Reconnaissance missions against the Voidborn have a survival rate of less than 30%. Most commanders only send volunteers who have proven themselves in multiple battles. You and your people have never fought the Voidborn before. That is true, Commander. But sometimes a fresh perspective can be valuable. We might see things that more experienced soldiers would miss. Or you might die horribly within the first few minutes of landing on that planet, Zex Kalar replied bluntly. Jake, Morrison was quiet for a moment, then nodded. That is possible. But if we succeed, the information we gather could save hundreds of lives in the main assault. Is that not worth the risk? Zex Kalar felt a strange sensation, something between admiration and concern. This young human was either very brave or very foolish, and the commander was not sure which. Most alien soldiers, even experienced ones, would hesitate before volunteering for such a dangerous mission. But Jake Morrison had not hesitated at all. I will consider your request, Zex Kalar said finally. Return to your ship and prepare your team. I will give you my decision in 6 hours. After the humans left, Zex Kalar stood alone on his bridge, staring out at the stars. He had commanded many different alien species during his long military career. He knew how they thought, how they fought, and how they reacted under pressure. But these humans were different somehow. They seemed so fragile, yet they showed no fear of death. They appeared weak, yet they volunteered for the most dangerous missions. Perhaps that was what made them interesting. 6 hours later, Zex Kalar sent a message to Jake Morrison's ship. Your request is approved. Prepare for reconnaissance mission to Kepler 442b. Launch in 18 hours. He still was not sure if he was making the right decision. But something told him that these strange creatures from the small blue world might surprise everyone, including themselves. As he watched the human ship move into position for the upcoming mission, Zex Kalar felt the familiar excitement that came before a major battle. Soon, he would learn what humans were truly capable of in combat. He had no idea that this knowledge would change everything he believed about war, peace, and the nature of intelligent life in the galaxy. The landing on Kepler 442b went wrong from the very first moment. Jake Morrison's reconnaissance team was supposed to touch down quietly in the northern valley, far from any Voidborn activity. Instead, their small transport ship came under heavy fire the moment it entered the planet's atmosphere. Zex Kalar watched the attack from his command ship high above the planet. His sensors showed enemy energy beams tearing through the human vessel's hull. Any normal transport would have been destroyed instantly, but somehow Jake's pilot managed to keep the ship flying long enough to reach the surface. Human vessel. Report your status, Zex Kalar commanded through the communication system. Jake's voice came back through heavy static. We are down, Commander. Ship is badly damaged, but the team is alive. We count 6 members still operational. What is your current situation? We are in the middle of a Voidborn patrol zone. Intelligence was wrong about enemy numbers. There are not hundreds of Voidborn here, there are thousands. Zex Kalar felt his stomach drop. The mission was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance operation. Get in, observe the enemy facility, gather information, and get out. Now his liaison officer and 6 other humans were trapped on a hostile planet, with enemy forces closing in from all sides. Lieutenant Morrison, abort the mission immediately. Move to the emergency extraction point. I will send rescue ships. Negative, Commander. The extraction point is overrun with voidborn forces. We cannot reach it safely. Then find somewhere to hide and wait for rescue. Do not engage the enemy. There was a long pause before Jake responded. Commander, hiding is not an option. The Voidborn have some kind of tracking technology. They know exactly where we are. We have 2 choices. Fight our way through them or die here. Zex Kalar closed his eyes. He had sent these humans to their deaths. Their blood would be on his hands, and he would have to explain to their families why he had approved such a dangerous mission. He opened his mouth to order them to surrender even though he knew the Voidborn did not take prisoners. Then something unexpected happened. Jake Morrison laughed. Commander, my team has a plan. We are going to complete the mission. Lieutenant, you are surrounded by thousands of enemy soldiers. Your ship is destroyed. You have no way to escape. How can you possibly complete the mission? Watch and learn, sir. What happened next defied everything Zex Kalar knew about military tactics and common sense. Instead of trying to hide or retreat, the human team split up and began moving toward the enemy positions. Jake took 3 soldiers and headed directly for the main Voidborn facility. The other 3 team members, led by Corporal Lisa Hayes, moved in the opposite direction to create a diversion. Zex Kalar watched through his ship's sensors as the humans began their impossible assault. They moved through the rocky terrain like ghosts, using every piece of cover available. When they encountered Voidborn patrols, they did not fight fair. They used the environment as a weapon, causing rock slides to crush enemy soldiers and setting up ambushes in narrow canyons. Corporal Hayes and her team were especially creative. They found an old mining tunnel that led close to a major Voidborn staging area. Instead of avoiding the enemy, they crawled through the tunnel and emerged right in the middle of the Voidborn camp. Before the aliens could react, Hayes had rigged their own power generator to explode. The explosion destroyed dozens of enemy vehicles and created chaos throughout the Voidborn forces. But Hayes was caught in the blast. Zex Kalar watched her vital signs drop as she was badly injured by flying debris. Corporal Hayes is down, came the report from Sergeant Ben Carter. She cannot move without assistance. Zex Kalar expected the humans to retreat and try to save their wounded teammate. Instead, Hayes herself made a decision that shocked the alien commander. Negative, Sergeant. Leave me here. Take my equipment and continue the mission. We do not abandon our people, Corporal. You are not abandoning me. You are using me as a weapon. Before anyone could stop her, Hayes had taken her damaged communication device and several explosive charges from her equipment pack. She dragged herself to a position overlooking the main Voidborn supply route and began calling out enemy positions over the radio. At the same time, she started rigging her explosives to create a massive trap. What is she doing? Zex Kalar asked Jake Morrison. She is buying us time, Commander, and she is about to take a lot of enemies with her. Hayes waited until a full Voidborn convoy entered her kill zone, then detonated every explosive she had. The blast was so powerful that Zex Kalar's ship registered it from orbit. When the smoke cleared, the entire convoy was gone, along with a significant portion of the Voidborn supply line. Hayes did not survive the explosion, but her sacrifice allowed Jake's team to reach their objective. The main Voidborn facility was now lightly defended because most of the enemy soldiers were dealing with the chaos Hayes had created. Jake Morrison approached the facility with his remaining team members. Zex Kalar expected them to observe from a distance and gather what information they could. Instead, Jake made another decision that defied military logic. We are going inside, he announced. Lieutenant, that is suicide. You cannot fight your way through a heavily fortified enemy position with only 3 soldiers. We are not going to fight our way through, Commander. We are going to walk in the front door. Jake's plan was insane, but it worked. His team had collected Voidborn equipment from the soldiers they had killed during their approach. They used this equipment to disguise themselves and simply walked into the facility as if they belonged there. The Voidborn guards were so busy dealing with the ongoing attacks that they did not question the presence of additional soldiers. Once inside, the humans moved quickly and efficiently. They planted monitoring devices throughout the facility, downloaded critical data from Voidborn computers, and even managed to capture several enemy weapons for analysis. They did all of this while enemy soldiers ran past them in the corridors, never suspecting that humans were operating right under their noses. But Jake was not finished. As his team prepared to leave the facility, he made one final decision that left Zexkalar speechless. Instead of quietly slipping away, Jake decided to destroy the entire facility. Lieutenant, you have accomplished your mission. The intelligence you have gathered is invaluable. Do not risk everything for unnecessary destruction. With respect, Commander, this facility is producing weapons that will kill thousands of our people. Destroying it is not unnecessary. Jake's team had discovered that the Voidborn were using the facility to create a new type of weapon, something that could penetrate the energy shields used by most galactic species. If these weapons were deployed, the war would be lost within months. The humans spent their remaining explosives throughout the facility's critical systems. They timed the charges to detonate in sequence, ensuring maximum damage to the Voidborn operation. Then they fought their way out through the confusion and chaos they had created. The explosion that destroyed the facility was visible from space. Zexkalar watched in amazement as months of enemy construction work disappeared in a matter of seconds. The humans had not only completed their reconnaissance mission, they had struck a major blow against the Voidborn war effort. But the cost had been high. Of the 7 humans who had landed on Kepler 442b, only 4 were still alive. Hayes was dead, and 2 other team members had been killed during the escape from the facility. The survivors were wounded and exhausted, running on determination alone. Commander, this is Morrison. Mission accomplished. We have the intelligence. Data and the facility is destroyed. But we need immediate extraction. We cannot hold our position much longer. Zexkalar was already moving his rescue ships toward the planet's surface. Extraction ships are en route, Lieutenant. Hold your position for 10 more minutes. Understood, sir. We will be here. As the rescue operation began, Zexkalar found himself staring at the tactical display in confusion. Everything about the human mission had been wrong according to military doctrine. They had split their small force, engaged superior numbers, taken unnecessary risks, and sacrificed team members for tactical advantage. Any other species would have failed completely using such methods. But the humans had succeeded. Not only had they gathered the intelligence they were sent to collect, they had also eliminated a major enemy facility and dealt a serious blow to Voidborn operations in the sector. They had accomplished more in 6 hours than some entire fleets had managed in months of fighting. When Jake Morrison and his surviving team members were brought aboard Zexkalar's ship, the alien commander studied them carefully. They were covered in dirt and enemy blood, their equipment was damaged, and they had the hollow look of soldiers who had seen too much death. But their eyes were calm and steady. They showed no signs of shock or trauma from their ordeal. Lieutenant Morrison, your mission report, Zexkalar requested. Jake handed him a data storage device, complete intelligence package on Voidborn weapons production, facility layouts and defensive capabilities. Also, samples of their new shield-penetrating weapons and technical specifications for their communication systems. Zexkalar looked at the device in his hand. The information it contained would save countless lives and might even change the course of the war. 3 months had passed since the mission on Kepler 442b, and Zexkalar found himself working more closely with human forces than he had ever expected. The success of Jake Morrison's reconnaissance team had impressed the Galactic Council, and now human units were being assigned to major operations throughout the war zone. Zexkalar should have been pleased. The humans were proving to be valuable allies, and their unconventional methods were helping to turn the tide against the Voidborn. But instead of satisfaction, the alien commander felt a growing sense of unease that he could not explain. The feeling started during the Battle of Rigel 7. Captain Amy Rodriguez had been given command of a small human fleet with orders to delay a massive void-born invasion force. The enemy had over 200 ships compared to Rodriguez's 30 vessels. Any reasonable commander would have retreated and called for reinforcements. Rodriguez did neither. Instead, she led her fleet directly into the asteroid belt surrounding Rigel 7 and began playing a deadly game of hide-and-seek with the void-born forces. Zex Kalar watched the battle from his command ship, positioned at what he thought was a safe distance. He expected to see the human fleet destroyed within hours. The void-born ships were larger, more heavily armed, and far more numerous than the human vessels. But Rodriguez had not chosen the asteroid field randomly. She had studied the gravitational patterns, the orbital mechanics, and the composition of every major asteroid in the belt. When the void-born ships entered the field to hunt down the humans, she was ready for them. The first enemy ship was destroyed when Rodriguez used her ship's weapons to destabilize a large asteroid, sending it crashing into the void-born vessel at tremendous speed. The second ship was eliminated when she lured it into a narrow canyon between two asteroids, then collapsed both sides of the canyon using precisely placed explosives. But it was her treatment of the third ship that made Zex Kalar realize something disturbing about human warfare. Instead of destroying the vessel quickly, Rodriguez disabled its engines and left it floating helplessly in space. Then she broadcast the crew's distress calls on all void-born communication frequencies. "Why is she doing this?" Zex Kalar asked Jake Morrison, who was serving as his liaison during the battle. "She wants the other void-born ships to attempt a rescue," Jake explained calmly. "When they do, she will be waiting for them." "That is," Zex Kalar struggled to find the right words. "That is using their compassion for their comrades against them." "Yes, sir. It is very effective." The trap worked exactly as Rodriguez had planned. 3 void-born ships broke formation to rescue their disabled comrade. All 4 vessels were destroyed in a carefully prepared ambush. The remaining enemy ships, shaken by the loss of their companions, began making mistakes that Rodriguez exploited, ruthlessly. By the end of the day, Rodriguez had destroyed over 50 void-born ships while losing only 8 of her own vessels. The surviving enemy fleet retreated rather than continue fighting in the asteroid field. It was a brilliant tactical victory, but Zex Kalar felt sick watching it unfold. The next incident occurred 2 weeks later during a ground assault on Proxima Station. Staff Sergeant Kevin Walsh was leading a small unit of human soldiers against a heavily fortified void-born position. The enemy had taken control of the station's main power plant and were using it as a stronghold. Most commanders would have ordered a direct assault or tried to surround the position. Walsh chose a different approach. He began broadcasting false surrender messages on void-born communication channels, claiming that human forces were ready to give up because they were running out of ammunition and medical supplies. The messages were very convincing. Walsh included details about wounded soldiers, failed supply drops, and low morale among the human troops. The void-born commanders believed the deception and began preparing to accept the human surrender. But Walsh was not planning to surrender. He was studying how the void-born responded to his fake messages, learning about their command structure, their protocols, and their decision-making processes. When he had gathered enough information, he used it to predict exactly how the enemy would react to his real attack. The assault began at dawn. Walsh's soldiers moved through the station's maintenance tunnels, emerging at precisely the locations where the void-born would be least prepared for them. The enemy was caught completely off guard because Walsh had manipulated them into positioning their forces incorrectly. The battle was over in less than 2 hours. The void-born garrison was eliminated, and Proxima Station was back under Allied control. But Zex Kalar was disturbed by Walsh's methods. The human had essentially tortured the enemy psychologically, using their own honor and mercy against them. "Sergeant Walsh," Zex Kalar said after the battle, "your tactics were effective, but they relied on deception and manipulation. Do your people consider this honorable warfare?" Walsh looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Commander, honor has nothing to do with it. War is about winning. If the enemy is foolish enough to believe lies, that is their weakness, not our fault." The third incident that troubled Zexcalar happened during the siege of New Centauri. Major Susan Clark was coordinating a massive Allied offensive involving ships and ground forces from 7 different star systems. The operation required precise timing and flawless communication between dozens of different units. The problem was that the Voidborn had jammed most communication channels, making coordination nearly impossible. Other commanders had postponed similar operations until the jamming could be overcome. Clark decided to proceed anyway. She used an obsolete emergency communication system that most military forces had abandoned decades ago. The system was slow, unreliable, and could only transmit simple coded messages. But it was so old that the Voidborn had not bothered to jam it. Clark spent days creating an elaborate code system that allowed her to send complex tactical instructions using the primitive communication method. She coordinated attacks across 7 different star systems, timing them to occur within minutes of each other, all while using technology that most species considered useless. The offensive was a complete success. Voidborn forces found themselves under attack simultaneously on multiple fronts, preventing them from concentrating their defenses. New Centauri was liberated, and enemy forces in the entire sector were forced to retreat. But what impressed Zexcalar was not just Clark's tactical skill. It was her complete lack of emotion when discussing the casualties. Over 3,000 Allied soldiers had died during the offensive, including many humans. When asked about the losses, Clark simply stated that they were within acceptable parameters for an operation of that scale. "Major Clark," Zexcalar said during the post-battle briefing, "do you feel any remorse about the soldiers who died under your command?" Clark considered the question carefully before answering. "Commander, feeling remorse would not bring those soldiers back to life. My job is to complete the mission with minimum casualties, not to feel guilty about necessary sacrifices. Emotion has no place in tactical decision-making." Her answer chilled Zexcalar to his core. He had seen many commanders make difficult decisions during his long career, but they always showed some sign of regret when their orders resulted in deaths. Clark spoke about casualty numbers the same way she might discuss ammunition expenditure or fuel consumption. The final incident that convinced Zexcalar that something was wrong happened during the Battle of Proxima Station's defense. Colonel Pete Jackson was coordinating the station's defenses when a massive Voidborn fleet arrived to retake the facility. The battle was intense and chaotic. Ships from both sides filled the space around the station, firing energy weapons and launching missiles in all directions. During the fighting, a wing of Thraxian fighters became separated from their main formation and found themselves surrounded by enemy vessels. Jackson had a choice. He could order human ships to rescue the IDO Thraxian fighters, which would risk valuable human lives and ships, or he could sacrifice the alien pilots to maintain his tactical advantage. Without hesitation, Jackson chose the second option, but he made the choice even worse. Instead of simply abandoning the Thraxian fighters, Jackson used them as bait, allowed the Voidborn ships to focus on destroying the alien pilots, while human vessels moved into position for a devastating attack on the enemy formation. The tactic worked perfectly. The Voidborn fleet was caught off guard and suffered heavy losses. But 12 Thraxian pilots died because Jackson had used them as expendable decoys. After the battle, Zexcalar confronted Jackson privately. The human colonel showed no sign of guilt or regret about his decision. "Colonel Jackson, those Thraxian pilots were our allies. They trusted us to support them in battle. Commander, war is not about trust or friendship. It is about winning. Those pilots died, but their death saved the station and prevented thousands of additional casualties. That is an acceptable trade." Acceptable to whom? To anyone who understands? That victory requires difficult choices. Zexcalar stared at the human officer, trying to understand what he was seeing. Jackson was not evil or cruel. He genuinely believed that his actions were correct and necessary. The colonel had calculated the value of Thraxian lives against the strategic importance of the station, and decided that the trade was worthwhile. Zexcalar could not sleep. For 3 days he had been lying in his quarters, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything he had seen during his months of fighting alongside human forces. The more he thought about it, the more questions filled his mind. Every other species in the galaxy had periods of peace in their history. The Thraxians had fought major wars, but they were separated by decades or even centuries of peaceful development. The Corvani had their clan conflicts, but these were ritual combats with strict rules and limited casualties. Even the aggressive Xanthari had long periods where they focused on art, philosophy, and scientific advancement. But the humans seemed different. They fought with a skill and efficiency that suggested they had been practicing warfare for a very long time. Their tactics were too sophisticated, their psychological methods too refined, and their comfort with violence too complete for a species that only learned to travel between stars 20 years ago. Zex Kalar made a decision that would change everything he thought he knew about humanity. He accessed the human databases that had been shared with Allied forces and began studying Earth's history. What he found horrified him. The first thing that struck Zex Kalar was the sheer number of conflicts in human records. The database contained information about thousands of wars, battles, and violent conflicts stretching back over 10,000 years. Not occasional wars separated by long periods of peace, but constant, continuous warfare that seemed to define human civilization. He read about something called World War I, a global conflict that killed millions of humans using poison gas, machine guns, and artillery bombardments. The descriptions of trench warfare reminded him of the most brutal siege tactics used by the most savage alien species he had ever encountered. Then he discovered that World War I had been followed by World War II, an even larger conflict that killed even more people. Humans had developed weapons that could destroy entire cities in single explosions. They had created systematic methods for killing civilians. They had turned industrial production into tools for mass destruction. But these were not ancient conflicts from humanity's primitive past. World War II had ended less than 100 years before humans achieved spaceflight. They had been fighting massive planet-wide wars using advanced technology, while most other species were still discovering agriculture. Zex Kalar dug deeper into the records, looking for periods of peace in human history. He found very few. Even when humans were not fighting major wars, they were engaged in smaller conflicts, civil wars, revolutions, and what they called proxy wars, where different nations fought each other indirectly. The alien commander began to understand why human soldiers were so effective. They had not learned to fight during this war against the Voidborn. They had inherited the knowledge from thousands of generations of ancestors who had been fighting constantly for their entire recorded history. Every strategy he had seen humans use, every tactic that had impressed or disturbed him, had been developed during conflicts between human nations. The psychological warfare, the deception, the willingness to sacrifice allies for strategic advantage, all of these had been practiced and perfected during wars against their own species. Zex Kalar called for Captain Danny Foster, one of the human officers who had been working closely with his staff. Foster was a quiet man who rarely spoke unless asked direct questions, but he had demonstrated the same tactical brilliance that Zex Kalar had seen in other human commanders. Captain Foster, I have been studying your people's history. I need to understand something. Foster sat down across from the alien commander, his expression carefully neutral. What would you like to know, sir? Your species has been at war continuously for thousands of years. How is this possible? How did your civilization survive such constant violence? Foster was quiet for a long moment, as if considering how to answer the question. When he spoke, his voice was calm and matter-of-fact. Commander, I think you misunderstand something about human nature. We did not survive despite the constant warfare. We survived because of it. Explain. Every war taught us something new about fighting, about survival, about organizing large groups of people for complex tasks. The societies that learned these lessons survived and grew stronger. The ones that did not learn were conquered or destroyed. Foster gestured toward the viewport where stars filled the darkness of space. You want to know why we are good at this war against the Voidborn? It is because we have been practicing on each other for 10,000 years. Every strategy, every tactic, every method of psychological warfare, we developed these fighting our own people first. Zexcalar felt a chill run through his body. You are saying that humans evolved to be warriors? Not exactly, sir. We evolved to be survivors. But on Earth, survival meant being better at violence than anything else that wanted to kill us. That included other humans, dangerous animals, harsh environments, and natural disasters. We became good at fighting because fighting was the only way to stay alive. Foster leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting Zexcalar's compound gaze. Commander, do you know what separated humans from other species on our planet? It was not our intelligence, our tools, or our ability to work together. Lots of Earth animals are intelligent and use tools and cooperate. What made humans special was our ability to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we were. How? We learned to think like our enemies. We studied their behavior, figured out their weaknesses, and developed weapons and tactics specifically designed to exploit those weaknesses. We did not just hunt animals for food. We hunted them to extinction when they competed with us for resources. Foster paused, then continued with the same calm voice. Then we turned those same skills on each other. Human tribes fought other human tribes using increasingly sophisticated methods. Nations developed armies and strategies to defeat other nations. We created weapons designed specifically to kill other humans more efficiently. Zexcalar was beginning to understand, and the understanding terrified him. Your entire species is the product of evolutionary warfare. Yes, sir. The humans who were best at violence survived and had children. The ones who were not good at violence died. This process continued for thousands of generations. Every human alive today is descended from people who were very, very good at killing their enemies. But you also created art, literature, science, philosophy. Foster nodded. Of course we did. But even those things were influenced by our violent nature. Our art is full of stories about war and conflict. Our literature celebrates heroes who win through violence. Our science was often driven by military needs. Even our philosophy deals with questions about when violence is justified and how to organize society to prevent or win wars. Zexcalar thought about the human soldiers he had worked with over the past months. Jake Morrison's calm acceptance of dangerous missions. Amy Rodriguez's ruthless tactical brilliance. Kevin Walsh's psychological manipulation of enemies. Susan Clark's emotionless calculation of casualties. Pete Jackson's willingness to sacrifice allies for strategic advantage. Captain Foster, are you telling me that this behavior is normal for humans? Commander, what you have been seeing is not exceptional human behavior. It is just human behavior. We think about conflict differently than other species because we had to. We do not see war as an unfortunate necessity or a failure of diplomacy. We see it as a problem to be solved using all available tools. Foster stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. You know what really made us effective in this war against the Voidborn? It was not our technology or our courage. It was the fact that we recognized what kind of enemy they were from the very beginning. What do you mean? The Voidborn do not negotiate. They do not surrender. They exist only to consume and destroy. Most alien species kept trying to find diplomatic solutions or ways to coexist with them. Humans looked at the Voidborn and immediately understood that this was a war of extinction. Either we destroyed them completely or they would destroy us completely. Foster turned back to face Zexcalar. That is a type of conflict that humans understand very well. We have fought wars of extinction before, both against other species on our planet and against other human groups. We know how to win those wars. How? You do whatever is necessary. You use every advantage you can find. You exploit every weakness in your enemy. You do not worry about honor or fairness or minimizing casualties. You focus entirely on victory, because defeat means death for everyone you care about. Zexcalar sat in silence for several minutes, processing what he had learned. The humans had not developed their military skills during this war. They had brought those skills with them from Earth, refined over thousands of years of constant conflict with their own species. Captain Foster, what happens when this war is over? When the Voidborn are defeated? Foster was quiet for a long time before answering. I do not know, Commander. Humans have never really experienced true peace. There has always been another enemy, another threat, another conflict to prepare for. If we defeat the Voidborn completely, he shrugged, we will probably find something else to fight, even if that something else is other alien species. The war against the Voidborn Collective ended on a Tuesday. Zexcalar received the news while standing on the bridge of his command ship, watching the final enemy fleet retreat into the darkness between stars. After 3 years of constant fighting, the galaxy was finally at peace. But the victory had not come through superior firepower or advanced alien technology. It had come through a campaign designed and executed by human military leaders, using methods that made Zexcalar's shell crawl with unease. General Claire Abbott had been placed in command of the final offensive 6 months earlier. Unlike other alien commanders who focused on destroying enemy ships and capturing territory, Abbott had targeted something much more fundamental: the Voidborn will to fight. The campaign began with systematic attacks on Voidborn communication networks. Human teams infiltrated enemy systems and began broadcasting false information, creating confusion and distrust within their ranks. The broadcasts were carefully designed to make different Voidborn factions suspect each other of treachery and betrayal. At the same time, Abbott ordered strikes against Voidborn cultural sites and symbols of authority. These targets had no military value, but their destruction sent a psychological message to enemy forces. The humans were not just fighting a war, they were attempting to break the spirit of an entire civilization. The most disturbing part of Abbott's strategy was her use of captured Voidborn prisoners. Instead of simply gathering intelligence from them, she had human psychologists study their fears, their social structures, and their deepest cultural beliefs. This information was then used to create propaganda specifically designed to terrorize Voidborn populations. The humans broadcast recordings of Voidborn prisoners describing horrible fates that awaited their people if they continued to fight. They created false evidence of human weapons that could destroy entire planets. They spread rumors about human abilities that were physically impossible, but psychologically devastating to enemy morale. The psychological warfare campaign worked better than anyone had expected. Within 6 months, Voidborn forces were surrendering, in large numbers. Many enemy soldiers simply abandoned their posts and fled rather than face human forces in battle. The collective's leadership, faced with the complete collapse of their military effectiveness, finally agreed to negotiate a peace treaty. But Zexcalar had heard the conversations between human leaders during the victory celebrations. He knew that the humans viewed this peace treaty very differently than other alien species did. The Thraxians, the Kepler Union, the Centauri Republic, they all think this war is over. Admiral Robert Hayes had said to Secretary of Defense Linda Price during a private meeting that Zexcalar had accidentally overheard. They do not understand that for us this was just practice. Practice for what? Price had asked. For the next war. We learned everything we need to know about alien military, capabilities, their weaknesses, their tactical thinking. If we ever need to fight them, we will know exactly how to win. We will not need to fight them, Price had replied with a cold smile. They will never risk making us their enemy. They have seen what we can do. Standing on his bridge now, watching the victory celebrations on a dozen different worlds, Zexcalar finally understood the terrible truth about human combat capability. They had not just won a war against the Voidborn. They had demonstrated to every species in the galaxy that humanity was the apex predator in their new interstellar community. The victory ceremony took place on Earth, in a massive hall filled with representatives from every allied species. Zexcalar attended as an honored guest, wearing the medals and decorations he had earned during the war. But all he could think about was the conversation he had overheard and what it meant for the future of galactic civilization. President Mark Johnson gave a speech about peace, cooperation, and the bright future that awaited all species now that the Voidborn threat had been eliminated. The alien representatives applauded and spoke about lasting friendship between their peoples. Everyone seemed genuinely happy that the war was over, but Zexcalar watched the human military leaders in the audience. Their faces showed polite interest in the peace talks, but their eyes held something else entirely. They looked like hunters, who had successfully demonstrated their skills and were now waiting to see what their next prey might be. After the ceremony, Zex Kalar was approached by Jake Morrison, who had been promoted to colonel during the final months of the war. The young human officer looked older now, marked by the experiences of command and the weight of decisions that had cost thousands of lives. "Commander Zex Kalar, I wanted to thank you for everything you taught me during this war. Working with the Thraxian military has been an honor. Colonel Morrison, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, sir. What do you think will happen now that the war is over? What will humans do during peacetime?" Jake considered the question carefully before answering. "Commander, I do not think humans are very good at peacetime. We have tried it before, but it never lasts very long. Something always comes up that requires us to fight again. And if nothing comes up naturally?" Jake met his gaze steadily. "Then something will probably be created. Humans need challenges, conflicts to solve, enemies to overcome. It is what we are designed for, even if those enemies are former allies. Commander, the history of Earth is full of alliances that became conflicts when circumstances changed. Nations that fought together against common enemies often ended up fighting each other when those enemies were defeated. I do not see why space should be any different." Zex Kalar felt a chill run through his body. "Are you saying that humanity will eventually turn against the other species in the galaxy?" Jake shook his head. "Not necessarily, sir. But I am saying that if other species give us reasons to fight them, we will be very good at it. We have learned a lot about alien military capabilities during this war. We know how you think, how you fight, and how to defeat you if we need to." "That sounds like a threat." "No, Commander, it is just a fact. Humans prepare for every possibility, including ones we hope will never happen. Right now, human military planners are probably developing strategies for conflicts against every major alien species, just in case those conflicts ever become necessary." After Jake left, Zex Kalar walked alone through the halls of the human government building. He passed rooms where diplomats were discussing trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and joint scientific projects. Everyone was focused on building a peaceful future for the galaxy. But Zex Kalar knew that somewhere in this same building, human military officers were studying the alien species they had just fought alongside. They were analyzing tactical data, identifying weaknesses, and developing plans for conflicts that might never occur, but could be implemented at a moment's notice if circumstances changed. The alien commander realized that humanity's greatest victory in this war had not been defeating the Voidborn. Their greatest victory had been convincing every other species in the galaxy that they were valuable allies rather than potential threats. But the truth was more complex and more frightening. Humans were allies only as long as it served their interests to be allies. They had evolved as apex predators shaped by millions of years of violent competition with everything that shared their world, including their own species. Now they had brought those predatory instincts to the galaxy, along with thousands of years of refined military knowledge. Other species celebrated the end of the war and looked forward to an era of peace and cooperation. But Zex Kalar suspected that humans were already planning for the next conflict, whenever and wherever it might occur. They had demonstrated their military superiority against the Voidborn, and now every alien species knew that challenging humanity would be extremely dangerous. This knowledge created a delicate balance of power that could last for years or decades. But Zex Kalar understood something that the other alien leaders did not. This balance depended entirely on humans choosing to maintain it. If they ever decided that their interests would be better served by conquest rather than cooperation, no other species in the galaxy would be able to stop them. Standing in the garden outside the human government building, watching alien diplomats and human officials shake hands and make promises about peaceful cooperation, Zex Kalar made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would return to Thraxia and file his official report about the war, but he would not include his suspicions about human nature or his fears about the future, because he had realized something that terrified him more than the Voidborn had ever done. If other alien species understood what humanity really was, they might try to act against the humans before it was too late. And if that happened, the resulting war would destroy galactic civilization. Because humans were very good at fighting, and they had just spent 3 years learning everything they needed to know about how to defeat every other species in the galaxy. Zex Kalar kept his silence, but he never stopped watching. He monitored human military activities, studied their expansion into new star systems, and tracked their diplomatic relationships with other species. He was waiting for signs that the mask of peaceful cooperation was beginning to slip, revealing the apex predators that lived beneath the surface.